Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Adventures Guild. And this is the third part in a three-part series on the Werewolves and Dogmen of Wisconsin. If you didn't catch the first two episodes, I'll put a link to them in the description below. But let's kick this off right away. Our first sighting takes place on a famous road just northwest of Milwaukee named Holy Hill Road. And it was just a little ways from Holy Hill Road in 2004, a painting contractor named Rick Silchert was driving early in the morning on his way to a job when he witnessed something he'd never seen before, and this is what he saw. I seen it come up out of the brush from one side of the road, and it came across the road. The head was really round and the ears were kind of pointy. I've never seen anything like that. Unfortunately, that's all we have concerning this first account. Our second account takes place in September of 2006 in Fitchburg, Wisconsin, which is on the south side of Madison. Here, a college student named Matt was studying for an exam around 2 a.m. in the morning when he began to hear these really strange and bizarre sounds coming from his walls. He said it sounded like bubble wrap being popped. This was immediately followed by flocks and flocks of birds fleeing in the air and making a huge ruckus as they took off. Now Matt shrugged all that off and he goes back to studying when an earthquake strikes. Now Matt is really unsettled. That was followed by a blood-curdling scream, which sounded like someone was being murdered or greatly harmed outside. So Matt shoots off out the front door, runs out into the street, and he's looking both ways to see where is that screaming coming from. He hears it again, and he looks down the street, and a car starts coming around a corner, and its headlights show the silhouette of this massive, werewolf-looking creature. And as the car's getting close to it, it flees, and the car pulls up to Matt, and it stops. And it turned out to be a police officer, and he asked if Matt was the one who had called, and Matt asked if they were there about the screams, and the police said, no, we were called here about the earthquake. So, I looked into the seismic records for 2006, and unfortunately, there was no activity. That seems to make this story a little sketchy and kind of ruins its credibility. Our third account takes place back up at Holy Hill Road, and it happens on November 9th of 2006. And this is one of the more famous cases that has happened recently. DNR agent Steve Krueger was out on his patrol, picking up roadkill off the road throughout Wisconsin highways in the area. As he was driving on Holy Hill Road, right where Troll Road meets it, there was a fresh deer carcass laying on the road. So, since Steve's there, he pulls over to pick it up, and he gets out, he puts his tailgate down, and he goes to grab the ramps, but he looks at the deer, and he's like, you know what? It's a small doe, I think I can pick it up and put it in the truck. So he reaches down, he grabs the doe. Sure enough, it's only about 80 pounds. So he picks it up and he puts it in the truck. Now, as strange as it sounds, Steve can't just drive off. If he does, he'll get charged with poaching. So he has to fill out some paperwork before he can leave the area. So he's sitting in his truck and he's filling out the paperwork, and he can feel the wind blowing the truck. It's swaying around a little bit. And he continues to fill it out, and it really starts to shake. And so he looks up, and in his mirror, he sees behind him the bed of his truck, which is lit up by the cargo light, this wolf-looking creature. He said it was about the size of a bear, but it had like a wolf's head, and this big muscular arm with a hand reached over and grabbed the deer carcass. Now he's looking at this thing and he's getting more and more scared, and all of a sudden he just takes off and he goes. But he hears this metallic noise when he takes off, and he realizes that he just lost his ramps, and he has to have those ramps for his job. he has to go back for him. So he goes down the road. He's parked there for about 5 minutes trying to get his courage built up, waiting for somebody to drive by so he feels more safe about going back. But nobody shows up. No cars drive by. So he turns around, he drives back to Toll Road, and his ramps aren't there. Both the deer carcass, this werewolf-looking thing, and the ramps are all gone. There's no sign of them anywhere on the side of the roads or up or down the road. Here's part of Steve's account in his own words. All I saw was the creature, one paw, or whatever it was, on it, reaching over to grab the deer. The head looked like a cross between a bear and a wolf. It had really big pointy ears like a wolf. It scared the living heck out of me. I threw it into drive and off I went. A few hours later, Steve decides he really better go and report this to the police because this thing was horrifying to look at and it was dangerous. So he walks into the police station, he gives his report. Now the police are kind of snickering about it a little bit. They really don't believe Steve, but they do their job and they go out to the scene and they investigate and they look around for tracks. They look for the carcass of the deer. They look for the ramps. There is nothing. There is no sign anything ever took place at this location. Now, the one thing that nobody talks about in all the coverage of this famous story is what's just right there at this location. This thing. This is Holy Hill. And it's really strange that this really bizarre creature just so happened to be right here at this location. A local tracker had heard about this story. He immediately went out, began to scan the area, and he did pick up tracks. And he said whatever left him had to have weighed several hundred pounds, that this was a huge animal. However, he wasn't able to track this beast back to its lair. If you're enjoying this video, make sure to hit the like button. Our fourth account takes place during the summer of 2016 at Long Lake in Danbury, Wisconsin. Here, 16-year-old John and one of his cousins were visiting his grandparents. And John had brought a couple of his airsoft rifles. Now, his cousin was wearing regular street clothes, but John, he was completely decked out in camouflage and in BDUs, and he decided to take this fight into the woods where he would have the advantage. In the middle of the battle, John decides to mess with his cousin, and he tells him, "Shh!" And his cousin stops, and he goes, "Something's watching us." And his cousin gets a little freaked out. John picks up something, though. When his cousin went quiet and he went quiet, he noticed the forest was dead silent. This is an indication that there could be a large predator in the area or some sort of disturbance. Now, John, playing around with this new situation he just created, tells his cousin, "We gotta go. Something's watching us." And so his cousin turns and bolts. He starts running back for the cabin. Well, John starts scanning the forest because even though he's joking around, he knows something's off, something's not right. When he detects a set of teeth, and because of the white of the teeth, he honed in on this reddish-brown creature that blended in perfectly with the forest. And this is what John described had happened. It had reddish-brown fur and almost blended in perfectly until I focused on it. It had long front limbs, arm-like, with what appeared to be formidable claws, and it was standing kind of slouched down against a tree, like it was trying to be stealthy. Even though it was standing like that, it was nearly as tall as me. The only reason I saw it was because of its teeth. I think it was panting because its whitish teeth were visible. Its snout appeared to be a tad elongated. Now, as John's cousin's running, he looks back and he sees John still just standing there looking off into the forest, and he picks up just a chunk of color that he said did not look like the color of a bear, but he did not get a good look at this creature. He stops at a barn and he waits, and here comes John running out of the woods. Now, John never looked back. Once he turned and began running after he saw this thing, he just ran for his life. He didn't look back, but he said he could clearly hear this thing running through the forest, snapping limbs. Both boys made it back safely to the cabin, and when confronted by their grandfather what had happened, they told him that there was a bear. Now you can find John and more about this story on Reddit. His Reddit name is Trigger1154. Now it should be noted that Danbury is a famous location for Bigfoot sightings. So what John may have seen was actually a Bigfoot, though he said by its appearance and its ears, he's pretty sure that this thing was a dogman or a werewolf. Hey everyone, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll tell you why. I've got some real exciting videos coming up. After this series, I'm going to be talking about the Goatmen of Texas. There's a lot more going on than just the Goatmen at Goatman Bridge. The whole Dallas-Fort Worth area is encircled with these heavy areas of Goatman sightings. I'm going to talk about the history and the location of each one. And believe it or not, Goatman Bridge is actually the newest one of all the places. Also, I'm going to be covering the story of a location that's called Dagobah Castle. It's this abandoned structure that looks like a castle built by Yoda, and it's in a swampy area. As a group of friends had gone out there to do some urban exploring, and they had a horrible encounter on their way back by something they believe was Bigfoot. So make sure to subscribe so you can learn about the stories of these locations and where they're at so that you can go out and investigate these things yourself. Our fifth sighting takes place in the winter of 2018, and we have to drop back down to the Elkhorn area, and we're not going to be too far from Prairie Road. We're going to a town called Spring Prairie. In February of 2018, a gentleman named Danny Morgan submitted a story and a photograph of what he believed to have been a dogman to the Southern Lake newspaper. According to Danny, he and his buddy had been out drinking on January 27th, and he took his friend home around 10:30 at night in Spring Prairie. From there, he decided to jump on a road and start driving north towards Highway 43, but he couldn't remember which road it was. He thought he was on Weeks Road, but it could have been one of the few roads that go north. At any point, as he's driving, he sees what looks like a wolf coming across a field. It's on a well moonlit night, and Danny grabs his cell phone and he stops his car and he gets ready, and when this thing comes out in front of him, it's walking on two legs, and he snapped this photo. However, this photo has gone under a lot of scrutiny, and experts point out that this appears to be a taxidermied wolf mounted to stand on two legs, and they said that even one of the arms appears to have the skeletal structure sticking out. In my own research, I looked at the photo and I saw the 40-mile-per-hour sign, and if you look in the middle of the road, you see two yellow stripes. Now, there's only a couple of roads in this area that go north to Highway 43, and I looked at all of them, including the ones that didn't make it to Highway 43, and only 2 or 3 of these roads have yellow lines in the middle of them. And none of them are 40 miles per hour. This photo was not taken anywhere in the Spring Prairie area. Now for our sixth account, and we're going to go close to Oakfield, Wisconsin. This one is the granddaddy of werewolf and dogman areas. This is the place that everybody's been trying to find the location to. This is the home of Ricky Sanchez. Ricky Sanchez lived on a plot of land that had several homes on it. Now, I'm not going to give the exact address of Ricky's home, but I will give you the area right behind his home. And it's going to be the Wild Goose State Trail right where it crosses Lost Arrow Road. Now, that area right there at Lost Arrow Road and Wild Goose State Trail, this is the trail that they saw all these things happening on. Now, all these events kick off with a married couple. that were Ricky's neighbors, and they lived on the same plot of land that he did. They had just finished eating dinner, and they decided to go out on a walk after their meal. And so they went outside, they walked next door to the trail, right where the Wild Goose State Trail intersects Lost Arrow Road. Now, we don't know if they went south on the trail towards Oakfield or if they went north. However, they had a peaceful walk. It was when they returned that they began to have some problems. As they got close to their house, they began to hear people walking behind them. Now, they would both turn around and look, and there's nobody there. Eventually, Ricky's neighbor turns on the flashlight, and he whips around, and he shines the light, and it illuminates 5 sets of eyes. 4 of them are an amber color, but the 5th one was taller than the others, and it had a red glow to it. These things began to laugh at them, and they said that the laugh sounded like that of a hyena. Both his neighbor and his neighbor's wife made it home safely. Now, the next encounter that takes place here is also by Ricky's neighbor. He came home late one night from work, and when he pulled into the driveway, he could see the outline of a werewolf or a dogman off to the side. Now, this terrified him, and he's like, I ain't getting out of my truck. So he stays put in his truck, and he keeps looking over, and that thing won't leave. It's just sitting there watching him. Eventually, at some point, his neighbor falls asleep in the truck, and when he wakes up and looks out the window, the thing is gone. He managed to get enough courage, he got out of his truck, and he went in his home safely. The third encounter at this location was his neighbor again, and his neighbor had to go to work around 2 a.m., and it was on trash night. So his neighbor goes out, and he puts a trash can in the truck and a couple of trash bags. He drives down the driveway, and he stops just shy of the road. He grabs the trash can, and he carries it out to the road, and just as he's about to set it down, he notices something is disrupting the headlights. Something is walking in front of him. So he looks over, and he sees this muscular werewolf dogman looking thing that was standing on all fours, and he said it was about 4 feet up off the ground. It began to yip at him, and he just stood there and looked at it. Eventually, it moved off to the side a little bit, and he makes a break for it. He goes and gets in his truck, and as he's getting in his truck, this thing starts howling at him. He gets in his truck, and he leaves and goes to work. Just a little time after this, his neighbor leaves for work once again in the middle of the night. And after his shift ends, it's daylight. When he comes out to his truck, he sees these dirty wolf paw prints or canine prints all over his truck. And he finds his tailgate down. He doesn't remember leaving it down, but he said he could have. But around the tailgate were tufts of hair. Now finally, Ricky comes into the picture. One night, Ricky and his neighbor that's had all of these encounters were sitting around the bonfire. And they were eating cheese, and they're drinking coffee, and they're talking to each other. It's around 2 a.m. in the morning when they hear running going through the grass. They begin to look around to see what's making this noise when they both lock eyes on this tall black dogman with white tufts of hair coming out of its ears. They look at it looks at them, it kind of steps back out of the light, and at this point they take their chairs and they turn them back to back, and they begin looking around, and they're seeing movement taking place all around the perimeter of the property. While they're sitting there back to back looking around, the barn cat comes flying past them and starts running right towards these dogmen. And it just slams to a halt. It turns around and it bolts as fast as it can past them and goes back to the house. So they're sitting there, they see some movement off and on. Eventually at 2:30, a large rock comes flying into the property and smashes into the barn. At that, the two of them decide to go inside. This was enough for them for the night. On another night, Ricky and his neighbor were once again out by the bonfire. And it was twilight, it wasn't quite dark. They got the fire going, but the mosquitoes were insane that night, and they wouldn't leave them alone. They kept harassing Ricky and his neighbor, and they're like, forget it. So Ricky's neighbor grabs a bucket of water, and he violently throws it on the fire to put it out, and it makes this thundering, sizzling noise, and steam goes off up into the air. And this startles one of the dogmen, and it leaps out of the field and out into the open, and it locks eyes with Ricky and his neighbor, and they lock eyes with it. Eventually, it breaks its gaze, and it runs over and jumps on to the Wild Goose State Trail, and they go to follow it, but they realize it's too dangerous. They can see up the trail. They can't see this thing. There's trees and shrubs on the side. And Ricky's like, if we walk down that trail, we're walking into an ambush. This isn't safe. Let's not do it. So they go back home and they go inside. The next encounter was Ricky by himself. And he's going out to his car to get some water. To keep his hands free, he's put on a headlamp. And he's got it turned on and he's walking out to his car. And his headlamp lands right on a dogman. And this dogman squatted next to a tree and it's holding on to it with its right arm. And it's looking right at Ricky. For some reason, it gets startled and it takes off and it shoots up this tree like a bear does. And it was so big and bulky that it was breaking all these limbs and leaves, and all this stuff comes flying out of the tree as it shoots up it. Ricky walks towards the tree and he looks up at it with his headlamp, and it lights up 2 sets of eyes sitting in the tree looking at him. Ricky goes back, gets his water, goes into the house, and that was that for that night. Even though there were more encounters and other things that took place here, I think it would be fair to let you go and listen to Ricky himself tell you about these things. So if you go and you Google Ricky Sanchez Dogman Encounters, you should find a number of podcasts. But now you can take your equipment and go out and investigate one of the hottest spots in all of the United States for dogmen and werewolves. Or you can get together with your friends and simply take a hike in the middle of the night. Even though this is the granddaddy of all places, we still have one more encounter to talk about before we end this series tonight. Our last sighting takes place in 2020 on Highway 36, just outside of Lyons, Wisconsin. And here, right in the middle of the day, a gentleman named Ron Rice was delivering fertilizer to a farm right there on Highway 36. And just as he pulled into their driveway, he looks over to the tree line right there at the edge of their property, and this massive creature comes walking out, and here's how Ron described what he saw. This thing was huge. It was over 7 feet tall. It was brown and hairy with coarse hair. It walked out and picked up something, then turned its back toward me and went right back into the woods. Ron will swear upon the graves of his family that this thing was a werewolf. Incredibly, just 2 weeks later, he was at the farm again in the middle of the day, and this thing walks out once again right in front of him in full view. Now, it looks like it'd be pretty hard to find a place to park and investigate the woods next to the farm. However, check this out. Just a block or two to the southwest of the farm is White River Park. There's plenty of parking there. It's open to the public, and there's a number of trails that lead off into the woods down to White River. This has got to be a prime location right now to go and investigate this thing. And as far as I know, you can even go there at night, but check into that before you do. Real quick, guys, before we go, I found something interesting. It's probably not the Men in Black, but it looks like one of their vehicles parked on Prairie Road, and you can find this on Google Maps. I'll put the coordinates in the description below. Also, if you want to go to any of the locations or any of the places I talked about, be sure to look in the description below and you'll find the addresses and coordinates there. Also, if you go to any of these places and investigate it and you have any sort of experience, let us know in the comments. Also, if you go out and do an investigation and you post a video about it, tell us the name of your channel and the name of your video so that we can help drive traffic to it. That's going to do it for this episode. Be sure to click on that logo to subscribe or watch one of these videos. And until next time, we're off on another adventure. God bless.